Cloud. Okay, so we're up to page 85, and this is the beginning of the Torah portion of Tazria, which is in the book of Leviticus. And the prior Torah portion was a Torah portion that the end of it was all about the animals, the kosher animals that we can eat. And there were elements there of what we call ritual impurity, which is something we don't really have today. And we're struggling just to get our minds around it and be able to draw the lessons we need. And the way that this Torah portion opened up was also in this level of what we're going to call impurity. And it was about internally generated, in this case, from a woman. And we haven't really gotten into the idea, the laws, to the extent that they're biblical, of a woman and her cycle and the menstruation and an understanding of what that means. But we do have something related about childbirth. It's a blood, but it's not menstrual blood. And even though that's treated in today's place in history, pretty much the same as far as relations between husband and wife and so on, the way this is fundamentally, in the way the Torah describes it, is that they're actually two different things. And there used to be a functional distinction in the halacha, in practice, between what kind of blood one was experiencing. And we'll get more into that later. But here what we said is that there's this period of what we're going to call, again, the woman is just her nature, and she's had baby, and it's a big simcha. But the idea of the child coming out, this soul she's been carrying, there's a certain, I guess we can call it like a certain spiritual imbalance that she's coming back to her baseline. And in that sense, while for most of the time of this time, it's really, there's nothing that impacts the time that she can spend with her husband and they can spend together. It does impact going into the temple. Now, as we're going to discuss, we're going to talk about, and this comes up a lot, that there's a process through which she gets past this, we'll call it spiritual imbalance. Now, in today's day, as I said, there's really, it's, for me, if I touch if I'm at a funeral, I touch a corpse, or even touch a dead animal, and therefore, in times of the temple, I wouldn't be able to go into the temple or eat of sacred foods until I went through the process of spiritual recovery. Today, even then, I wouldn't have to do it. If I want to go into the temple, if I need to go into the temple, then I have to go take care of it. But if I even when the temple stood, if I performed a funeral and I touched a corpse, or even through this performing a funeral, even if I'm under the same under the same roof as a corpse, or I carried the coffin, then I'm in that state, and I go home and I go about my business. There's no mitzvah for me to go and go to the mikveh and go through whatever the hoops I have to go through, unless I want to go into the temple. So it's more of a conditional thing. Here, the Torah does seem to say that there's more of an imperative that the woman has to, as soon as she can, she should be able to, she should get herself into shape so she can go to the temple and bring the offerings that are pursuant to her birth. So in text 7, it says the priest, the Kohen, must first offer up the sin offering. There's an offering we said was a sin offering, and part of that is, even though there's no sin involved here, but one of the things is, and we mentioned it last week, is that the Talmudic commentaries point out that the pain of childbirth and the difficulties that are in childbirth, and very often a woman's going to, swear to herself, I'm never doing this again. I'm not going to let him touch me ever again, or whatever it is. And once things settle, she may not, she may regret an oath, and an oath means things. So this is part of undoing and regretting the oath and absolving it. So, and thereby affect atonement for her. Inasmuch as until this point she was forbidden to eat sacrificial meat or enter the tabernacle precincts, she was considered quote unquote defiled. Again, I don't like the word in that regard. Thus, through the sin offering, she will be purified not only in fact but also in name, because she really, in fact, in many ways, she didn't need purity, but from the ritual defilement that she contracted when she delivered a child from the source of her blood, and from that time on be allowed to eat sacrificial meat and enter the tabernacle precincts, assuming that it's sacrificial meat that she can eat. After offering up her sin offering, the priest must offer up her scent offering. This is the law that applies to a woman who gives birth, whether to a male or a female. So, and here, and I'm not going to get into this too much, but it's kind of an odd way of the Torah framing is that this is the law, which seems to like cap off these laws, and then goes further with a separate law, which is like Appendix A. If she cannot afford a sheep for her scent offering, she may instead of bring a sheep for an scent offering, a fowl for a sin offering, take 2 turtle doves or 2 pigeons and offer up one as a scent offering, one as a sin offering. And as we've seen with regard to general, there's a sliding scale for that addresses means or God forbid, the lack of means. That these were expensive offerings, and therefore the Torah gives options where we could do it in a more economical way. The priest must first effect atonement for through the sin offering, then she will be thus rid of this defilement, and must then offer up the scent offering on her behalf. And that is it ends this section. Now, if we go to Hasidic Insights on number 7, we said she was considered quote unquote defiled. Again, it's defiled means it's something like dirty or wrong or morally wrong. It's not that at all. There is this, we'll call it a spiritual imbalance that comes. And here's the thought. Although ideally, every Jew should be ritually pure at all times in order to be able to enter the temple precincts and experience the heightened spiritual consciousness attainable there, Torah does not normally require a person who has become ritually defiled to rush to rid himself of the defilement of the earliest opportunity. As I said before, it's this 2,000 years ago. I carried a coffin. I did a mitzvah. I helped someone to help bury someone, which is it's a cosmic mitzvah. It's a beautiful thing. I did absolutely nothing wrong. But here, since I've come into contact with the opposite of life, to the death, there is this spiritual imbalance which I contract, and therefore, for me to go into the temple, I have to deal with that. Now, again, so I'm not rushing to go to the temple. I'm not a Kohen, and I have plenty to do. Same time, one would think that, for me, I'm living in Jerusalem, I'm living in Israel, there's a temple. Maybe I always want to be in shape. Maybe I don't want to be in a state where I know that if I am inspired to go to the temple or something comes up or to go to the temple, I can't because I still have to go through the process. And subconsciously or consciously, but even in a quiet way, maybe I always want to be open up. I want to be suited to be able to go into the temple. The temple is the nexus of the creator and created. It's epicenter of our spirituality. And maybe I guess ideally I shouldn't really be comfortable that I'm in a state where if I want to go, I can't. Because I'm thankful that we have the temple. So even though the Torah, as I said, doesn't tell me I have to go and purify myself, ideally one should want to be in that state. Now, they bring in the parentheses where the Torah does tell you have to, as I said, sometimes, if you have an obligation to bring an offering, so then obviously you got to go do it. They bring an example of it. I don't know why they only bring this example of it. The exception is the pilgrim festivals, for which all Jews are required to be undefiled in order to be able to partake of the sacrifice that must be offered on these occasions. If I have something coming up in my life, and I'm going to need to have eat from sacred food, then I have an option, a mandate to be in a suitable shape to be eat from those sacred foods. So I have to take care of it. And the pilgrimage offerings are an example of that. If I'm a few days before Sukkot, Shavuos, or Pesach, and now I'm going to be going to Jerusalem, well, then I really should get going, take care of everything, go to the mikveh, so that I come ready to be able to partake of the offerings. or to go into the temple. But generally speaking, there isn't this imperative to rid ourselves of this spiritual imbalance. We're going to call tuma, this ritual imperative. In the case of the new mother, however, since the Torah considers it defiled, even though a name only, even though it's first of all, she did nothing wrong. There's nothing morally wrong here, and also, it's not like a menstrual blood where that's actually it. This is something. It's birth blood, but still, no, the Torah says she can't go into the temple, and considers her not to have completed her atonement process during her extended purification period. Remember, we said it's altogether 40 days for a boy and 80 days for the birth of a girl. She was pregnant with a soul who itself that soul can also generate more souls, a girl, and therefore her coming back down to earth with to her baseline with the birth of the child is that much more tilting. So it is clear that she is encouraged to offer up her sin offering at the earliest permissible opportunity. The language of the Torah, it's that she should get this done now, soon, which doesn't really appear in the other sections where it's when you want to purify yourself, do it that way. Here, she's supposed to do it as soon as she can. Sages teach us that in some sense, God fulfills all the commandments He obligates us to perform. Just going to sticky note that idea. We'll just bring in another idea. The idea of, in other words, that she has an imperative to purify herself. There is a Torah concept that we find in the Medrash that in the scripture we call the mitzvahs are sometimes referred to as God's mitzvahs. They're actually mitzvahs given to us. So God gave us the mitzvahs, but a mitzvah is a commandment. They're commandments. One would think they're on us, and their responsibilities for us. So there may be God's commandments in that He gave them, but the language would indicate also is that it's actually they attach to Him. And indeed, the Mendy and the Talmud tell us that God also fulfills in a divine way all the commandments that God commands us to perform. In the language of the Talmud, there are those who instruct others to do things but don't do themselves. God is not that way. God does what He instructs others to do, and therefore God fulfills the mitzvahs again in the divine dimension. Thus, if God urges the new mother to complete her purification process at the earliest opportunity, not to spend even one extra moment deprived of the opportunity to enter the temple and partake of its holiness, euphoria, and exhilaration. Again, there should be a psycho-spiritual urge on our part to say, I don't want to be in a situation where I can't go to the temple. Because that's maybe I want to go, maybe I'm moved to go, and why would I want to be at this in this state where I'm not temple ready? So since the Torah urges her to not to specifically this young mother not to spend, even though for us it would be more internally generated, the Torah urges her in the verse here not to spend even one extra moment in disconnect from the temple. If God is telling her that one extra moment of disconnect from the temple is something she has to overcome, it should follow that God also doesn't want to spend one extra second in disconnect. Follows that God is equally anxious to redeem us from our exile, so we can join Him, so to speak, both in the rebuilt temple and in our spiritually elevated lives, which will become His temple with the advent of the Messianic era. So the temple is just the building. It's the condition, the idea of being one with God. So if the Torah tells this recently birthed mother, that she really, for her own spirituality, while she could, take her time legally in getting past the spiritual imbalance of birth, she should do as quickly as possible, so that she's always suited to be able to connect with the spirituality of the temple, which is really the spirituality connected with God. So it's like God also is eager. God tells this young mother that she shouldn't be satisfied with the built-in distance, and He's not satisfied with the built-in distance. He is anxious to redeem us from our exile, so we can join together to be together with us. The only reason God delays our redemption is in order that we too yearn to be redeemed immediately. And this was something that I would speak about quite often. and that we can get very comfortable in how we are if life is good. And this is what we know, and change is difficult. So for someone to say, that Mashiach is going to come, it's going to be a perfect world, but things are going to change, and say, something, wait a little bit. I have a vacation planned, and I'm just redoing my kitchen or whatever it is, because we have our lives as we know it, and we have our comforts as we know them, and this is an unknown. And one of the things that the Rebbe tried very hard was to shift that mindset, where we become anxious for a messianic world, anxious for a world where godliness is present, where that is our beauty, and we see the beauty, and the beauty of reality comes to the fore, which means there's no more any illness, poverty, and so on. Okay. So now that concludes that part of this first section of the Torah portion. Most of the Torah portion now is going to go into what's called saras. And we're going to read a bit about it. So actually, before we get into saras, that's going to be on page 86. Before I get in, I want to share a screen, and I made a little document here of a piece of Maimonides, of his laws of saras. I hope everyone can read this. And this is how he concludes his laws of saras. Saras, again, it's a skin ailment, which some people, I think the King James, and even early Chumash in the Frum world used to translate as leprosy, but it's not leprosy, because leprosy is it's a medical, it's a biological skin ailment. This was something miraculous and spiritual. It had physical manifestations, but it was spiritual. So Maimonides writes is that saras is a collective term including many afflictions that do not resemble each other. Okay, we're not going to get too much into that in the Torah, but saras is a general idea for skin afflictions, and they're not all identical, or not even close to identical. The whitening of a person's skin is called saras, as the falling out some of the hair of his head or beard. One is a skin ailment, one is the falling out of hair, and the change of color of clothes or houses. We're going to get to this saras on the skin, this saras on clothing, on furniture, on homes, on walls. So saras is somewhat a collective name. Even though it's most known for the saras, meaning this leprosy idea, which it is not, but the skin ailment. This change that affects clothes and houses, which the Torah described with the general term of saras, is not a natural occurrence. Instead, it is a sign and a wonder prevalent among the Jewish people to warn them against lashon hara, which is undesirable speech. Lashon hara is Hebrew words. Hara means that it's evil, it's immoral, and lashon means the tongue, or words. So in other words, when we speak negatively about someone else, when one of us speaks negatively about someone else, even if it's true, if it's not true, it's not lashon hara. It has another name. It's even worse. When a person speaks lashon hara, the walls of his house change color. If he repents, the house will be purified. If, however, he persists, the leather implements in his house upon which he sits and lies change color. In other words, it says the couches, the chairs, the recliners, the beds, they are affected by this mold. If he repents, they will be purified. If he persists, the clothes he wears change color. If he repents, it will be purified. If he persists, his skin undergoes changes. So what Maimonides is writing is that it works from the outside in. It's things that are more in our ambience, in our surroundings, that get affected until it actually affects the person themselves. And they develop saras. So as and there's a lot of minutiae here, but one of the things that it's assessed, and we have the Kohen is a primary figure here in declaring that a person has saras and is therefore ritually impure or has been healed from it. But if once he has been diagnosed as having saras, he has to isolate. It causes him to be isolated, and for it to remain known that he must remain alone, so he will not be involved in the talk of the wicked, which is folly and lashon hara. So when Maimonides says, and it's interesting, especially given what we've gone through these past few years, the amount of how rabbis over thousands of years have spoken about the emotional, mental, and physical damage that comes to a person from being in solitude, whether it's solitary confinement or quarantine. Again, sometimes it's medically necessary, but it's really considered a very big problem for the person. And here it's temporary, and part of it is a negative consequence for his actions, because here he was in talking negative speech, he's chipping away at the bonds between people. And then we say, so go away from people for a while, so that you don't do that. You don't spread your poison with people, and think about yourself and think about society. Think how much you appreciate society and appreciate being around people, and try to look at your behavior and adapt it to a way that is helpful to friendships and connections between people and not deleterious. Torah warns about this, stating, take care with regard to its tzara'at blemish. Remember what God your Lord did to Miriam. Okay, Miriam was Moshe's sister. There are 3 children: Miriam, Aaron, and Moses. And Moses was obviously, a very, very special person, and Miriam knew it, and Miriam herself was a prophetess, and Aaron was a prophet. Miriam saw that Moses had stopped cohabiting with his wife because he was so connected to God, and wanted to be always on call for when God spoke to him, and she said something. She didn't say it maliciously, but she wanted to help. But she spoke to her other brother Aaron about, we got to get Moses into line. Why is he doing this? Poor Tzipporah, his wife. And the Torah says she was afflicted with tzara'as. Now, this is what the Torah was implying. Contemplate what happened to the prophetess Miriam. She spoke against her brother. She was older than he was. She had raised him. She had endangered herself to save him from the sea, because when he was a baby floating in the Nile, she was there. Her mother had asked her to go to watch out for him, he was a Hebrew baby. The Hebrew babies were supposed to be killed. She could have suffered herself if she was trying to save this Hebrew baby. She put herself on the line for Moses. She did not speak pejoratively of him. She merely erred in equating him with other prophets, because other prophets, it's not this idea of, I'm so holy that I can't have a marital relationship. That's not a Torah idea. Moses was actually a prophet in a different way, at a different level, and therefore he had divine license for that, and what he did was okay. And assuming it was okay with Tzipporah too, but it's an exception. That's not a normal way of Jewish thinking. And Miriam saw Moses as a prophet. So what if you're a prophet? That's great. I'm also a prophet. It doesn't mean that I can't have a family. And therefore, that's why she erred in how she saw it. Again, there was nothing negative here, as far as nothing malicious at all. And Moses did not object to any of this. And Moses understood it. Moses wasn't offended. Nevertheless, she was immediately punished with tzara'as. So here Maimonides goes forward and he says, certainly an inference can be made with regard to the wicked and foolish men who speak extensively about great and wondrous matters. Therefore, a person who seeks to structure, actually, I cut some out over here, so this should be more like therefore, a person who seeks to structure his course of conduct should distance himself from their gatherings and speak to them, so that he will not become caught up in the web of their wickedness and foolishness. This is the path followed by the gatherings of fools. In the beginning, they speak excessively about empty matters. Then they come to speak negatively of the righteous until they deny God's existence entirely. In this vein, the psalm states, they set their mouths against heaven and their tongues strut on earth. What does the Talmud say? How do people get themselves into a place where they're able to set their mouths against heaven? It's because they they don't discipline their tongues. The tongues which previously were given free rein on earth, because they're just saying whatever comes to mind, and you have to be judicious with our words. This is speech of the wicked that is caused by loitering on the street corners, frequenting the assemblies of commoners, and spending their time at the parties of drunkards. And the term "wicked" here, to say, it doesn't mean that they're going and killing people. That was emptiness. In contrast, the speech of proper Jewish people only concerns words of Torah and wisdom. Therefore, the Holy One, blessed be He, assists them and grants them merit. Because of it, Malachi states, then those who respect God conversed, each person with his fellow, and God listened and paid heed. And a book of remembrance was composed before God for those who revere God and contemplate His name. So this is what Maimonides writes about as a warning that tsaras, Talmud tells us, tsaras came for a bunch of different. It was a physical affliction resulting from a spiritual malady. And it alerted us to a spiritual malady. And what was that spiritual malady? There was actually a panoply of what it could possibly be, but the most commonly pointed to was Lashon Hara, because Lashon Hara is a very common thing. And the Talmud says normal people, at least a hint of Lashon Hara every day they do. Otherwise, the world would be a lot quieter. Now, one thing about what the Rebbe pointed out about this idea of how Maimonides is painting this, is that there's certainly the idea of speaking negatively about someone with malicious intent. So I want to take this person down, either in my company or in a community or whatever, in a circle of friends. I am deliberately trying to clip this person's wings, and therefore spreading true negative talk about the person. We're not talking about that. That's a malice that Maimonides does address, but he speaks about it in his earlier laws of proper behavior. Here he's saying the idea that it doesn't have to be with malice at all, and that's why he goes to Miriam. It's a different level of Lashon Hara, where Lashon Hara is good people. That's why I say the wicked here, those the wicked people, good people, but we're sitting around, there's nothing to do. Or we're just chatting and things come up. And things come up. One of the interesting things that could be to talk about is other people. Did you hear about him or her? Or did you see what they were wearing or whatever it was? And it's a more insidious thing, because all of us could probably look and say, this idea of this, backbiting and the politics and trying to take down another person with this spreading negative words about them. We could all say that's just it's not physically hurting someone, but it's very much hurting them, and it's malicious. So you see, the person is doing it out of resentment or anger or hatred. But for us, we'd see it's much more benign. Say, I didn't mean anything. I just mentioned. And it's something that I heard this, and it was just an interesting factoid for a friend. But if the bottom line is that we see that person, the object of the conversation, the subject of the conversation, to see them in a less rosy way and bring them down, that's called Lashon Hara. So there is an idea, and the founder of Chabad, Rabbi Zalman of Ladi, when one of his books of Hasidic discourses, and he addresses this idea of tzaras, says that the language that we're going to read now, and we didn't get to it yet, but Hebrew is what will show itself. It says on page 86, verse 2, it says, if a person develops a white spot. A person, there are 4 different words that the Torah uses to be able to indicate that somebody. Adam, Ish, Gaber, Enish. 4 different words that say somebody. And the one, and they refer to different people, but the indication of a person in a certain spiritual state. And Adam, when that word is used, it means a person who's like a mensch. So when we start talking about a person who has tzaras, we talk about a person who's a mensch. If you speak in Lashon Hara, how do you say he's a mensch? And the idea is that speaking Lashon Hara is not a good thing. It's a violation of Torah law. Speaking Lashon Hara maliciously, of course, it's horrible. But where tzaras shows up is in a person who is otherwise living a good life. If I had skin afflictions and pimples all over my body and all over my face, and because of tzaras, another pimple came up, would you notice it? So spiritually, really, what the tzaras was a favor, a gift to a person, because if we're just sitting around the table and we're studying Torah, and then we close the book and we're talking a little bit about something, and then we mention something about a mutual friend, whatever it is, but there's something that even if we didn't intend it, there's a Lashon Hara element there. In our minds and our self-image, we may not really see we did anything wrong. If we sat and we planned to bring them down and to spread negative things about them, we know we did something wrong. We did it anyway, but we know we did something wrong. Here, the more insidious one is we don't know we did something wrong. So in an age where the soul and the body has greater connection with each other, and the body was therefore able to reveal to us where our soul deficiencies were. So then the next morning, I might get up and look at the mirror and see I have a spot on my face or on my hand, and I say, "Oh my gosh, what did I do? When did where did I go wrong with my speaking Lashon Hara?" And then remember, oh my gosh, yeah, I thought it was kind of benign, but in retrospect, it wasn't so benign. That's a favor to me, because I get to see my flaws and correct them and apologize and do what I have to do to prevent it for the future. And it doesn't allow me to just go forward, just thinking everything's great, when really it's not as great as I want to think about it within myself. So tzaras was a gift. Tzaras was helpful to humanity, and was specifically for a person who was careful about themselves, who had a more spiritual lifestyle, whose soul and body were in consistent touch, and they were people living their soul ambitions and soul drive, and now the body showed where something is off. So the very term Adam tells us that we're talking about here a person, and Maimonides brings it up when it comes to tzaras. Lashon Hara could be a person who's got a lot of emotional problems and a lot of hatred problems and a lot of interpersonal problems. But when it comes to tzaras, we're really not talking about that. We're talking about a person like Mary, or like any of us, where we're not dedicated to hurting anybody. But it behooves us to watch what we're saying, because in retrospect, even things that we say that are benign may not be as benign as we'd like to think. So we start now. That's the section on tzaras on page 86, and again, there's a juxtaposition that the last Torah portion, there was towards the end, there was a lot about what goes into our mouths. What are kosher animals? Kosher animals, heavy animals, light animals, fish, fowl. And now the Torah says, focused on that, on the kashrus, on the kosher and spiritual quality of what goes into your mouth. Now here's something more difficult: how to maintain a quality control on what comes out of your mouth. And tzaras is going to be a journey into stuff we've never seen. A lot of it at the core is this expression of this spiritual malady. Debbie, you asked a question?
Yes, one comment and one question. One, it's interesting that I don't think I remember hearing Saras as presented as being a gift, as a helpful thing, because
Yes.
it's an ailment, but
Yeah.
that's nice. I like that way to look at it. But so the point you were just making now about the kosher animals coming in and the kosher speech coming out, is there also is it seen as a spiritual connection that if you eat kosher, that helps you minimize your lashon hara or keeps your spiritual level? Or is it, I mean, really just more straightforward, like you were saying? But they always say like garbage in, garbage out. So you connected this spiritual animals in.
I've actually never seen anything about the direct causality between the two. But at the same time, we say with kosher animals, the idea is that we're ingesting physicality, and physicality that can make us coarser, or physicality that we can use to become better functional human beings and more spiritualized, if that's where we go. So I would say that eating kosher food, and especially we actually had it in one of the discussions in the last Torah portion, the way God says that we become not eating the non-kosher defiles the Hebrew word. It's missing a letter there, and it spells a word that we become like stuffed up. We become spiritually insensitive. So, and that's really the core of everything. Are we spirit? If we're, either we're inspired or we're not. Either we feel connected or not. We don't want to be just robots doing the right thing, which would be great doing it. But the thing is, you want to feel it. And therefore, eating kosher, we say, it allows us, our spiritual intent to be clear, so that we can connect with our deepest self and with Hashem. In order to watch our speech, that takes a level of sensitivity that is probably not helped by eating things that coarsen our sensors.
Okay, so not
direct causality.
Right, but it doesn't hurt. Well, it certainly doesn't hurt, obviously, but
it certainly helps.
Not, and I would think that maybe we should eat more tongue, right? Cow tongue, right? Kosher cow tongue, if it were direct, but it's not.
Correct. I mean, I can handle that, but my kids wouldn't want to hear that. So
I don't think anyone's going to eat it in another generation. So anyway, all right, carry on.
One of my kids says that's the food that tastes you back.
Yeah. It's the joke.
So
right?
we don't. Yes, we don't. I'm good with it, but it doesn't fly in my house. Okay. So the tzaraz that develops out of a white dermal lesion. That's on page 86. And let's see what we can done here. God spoke to Moses, instructing him to convey his words to Aaron, saying, in addition to contracting ritual defilement through birth, death, or certain discharges from the reproductive organ, because we did speak about, we just hinted at, there's the idea of gonorrhea. There's certain, and we'll have more of it, that where both on the male or on the female end, there's something that comes out of the genitalia that there could be discharges which also are spiritually destabilizing, let's put it. The possibility will also exist from now on that for a person or his or her possessions to become ritually defiled by a condition called tzaras, the symptoms of which are specific types of lesions or discolorations as follows. This condition specifically affects individuals of otherwise sterling character and moral excellence, which is what I mentioned before, from Maimonides frames it, and Rabbi Zalman, who have committed the sin of gossip, slander, or haughtiness. If tzaras and slander and haughtiness are seen as really underlying causes of the slander, because it's how we feel about others, that we feel that we have the right to be able to cast something, even as some kind of subtle aspersion. If tzaras appears on their bodies, so we said before that actually it's the house and the furniture and the clothes, and finally the bodies. But the Torah talks about it first from the bodies. So if tzaras appears on the bodies, it will appear on their heads if they are guilty of haughtiness, and elsewhere if they're guilty of gossip or slander. It is an entirely spiritual, miraculous condition, unrelated to any natural disease and with no physiological cause. So that's very important, that this is clear, because certainly when I was growing up, it wasn't as clear even in the Orthodox world with the translations. There's nothing physiological about this, there's nothing medical about it. It's purely spiritual. I mean, it was always clear in Torah, but in the translations, it wasn't always made clear that leprosy was kind of persistent, even in Orthodox translations. If a person develops a wool white spot, B, an egg membrane white spot, C, a snow white spot, or D, a lime white spot, or E, a spot of any of these 4 degrees of whiteness tinged with red streaks, but not so many red streaks that the spot loses its white appearance on the skin of his flesh, covering at least an area equivalent to a square, the length of each of those whose sides is equal to the diameter of a Cilician beam, which is about 0.24 inches. And it seems, according to the symptoms that will be described presently, that it forms a lesion of tzaras on the skin of his flesh. So a person has this thing, and again, there's white, and there's 2 types of bright of more intense white, and then a lower level of it. The wool white spot and the snow white spot are the they're called in Jewish law, like they are like it's like the fathers, that's what I was. That's the more intense, and then takeoffs of that are going to be the other ones, the little less intense, but within the same category of what we call the egg membrane or the lime white spot. So then the person, and this is to be brought to Aaron the high priest, or one of his sons, a regular priest, a Kohen. A Kohen has to be able to see this person or their successors, for only they are authorized to pronounce someone or something defiled or undefiled on account of tzaras. It has to come through the Kohen. The Kohen is seen as a person of love, and they're the person with the capacity to be able to look at this person and say, yes, you obviously spoke negatively about someone, but here I'm not here to condemn you. I'm trying to help you through this. Nonetheless, if a priest erroneously pronounces someone undefiled who's in fact defiled, his declaration is ineffective. Since the priest must examine the lesion before pronouncing the person defiled or undefiled, a blind priest is disqualified from rendering judgment in cases of lesions suspected to be tzaras. Now, what they bring here is an element of Jewish law, but Rashi brings it, so they bring it. These are very complicated laws. So very often, there are many Kohens who are not qualified to diagnose tzaras, but you need a Kohen. So often, what they would do is they'd have a Torah scholar who's not a Kohen assess it, and then they would bring a Kohen who then doesn't know the laws, but there's trust given to the Torah scholar. And the Torah scholar will say, pronounce it tzaras, or pronounce it pure. And it needed to go through the Kohen's ears and mouth. And that was it, because even if the Torah scholar is the greatest one amongst the Jewish people, if they're not a Kohen, they can assess it, but they can't affect the change, the shift in status to becoming a person with tzaras, called a betzora, or not. So that's the case. Maybe somebody, even a blind priest, could do it. Say no. So the way the Torah describes it, has to be someone with the ability to see and the physical capacity to assess and diagnose. They don't have the knowledge, they can't do it. But otherwise, if they had the knowledge, they would be able to do it. The priest may not examine someone or something suspected of suffering from tzaras during the festivals, nor may inspect the bridegroom or any of the bridegroom's possessions during the 7 days of rejoicing following the bridegroom's wedding. And this is the reason that because until the priest assesses and diagnoses and utters the words, the person is not in this state of metzora, of tzaras. And because the Torah was saying, we don't want to disturb someone's holiday or someone's wedding or Sheva Brachos, which is pursuant to the wedding, hold off on the diagnosis. So we're saying you're not allowed to evaluate it until we're in the clear to be able to have the diagnosis and be comfortable with the results of that kind of diagnosis, that they may not be able to, that it's going to disturb their ability for joyous interaction with their loved ones.
Can I ask a question?
Sure.
All right, so how are we to acknowledge Lashon Hara now, because we don't have Sarat? And do people have physical manifestations as the result of, like, does someone get a headache or get a backache or get, like, what's our feedback loop? Because we don't have this now.
Right. So the Talmud tells us that already thousands of years ago, we lost that ability for proper soul feedback. And therefore, there are actually a bunch of different remedies for medical remedies offered in the Talmud that worked, and then the rabbis of the Talmud themselves say later on it's not going to work, because it's only when there's a clear feedback is a good word for it, feedback from the soul to the body. So if we fix something on a soul level, it'll translate into the body. We don't see ourselves as capable for that anymore. We do know that there's emotional and spiritual feedback, right? Stresses can be related to, I mean, there can be physical pain that comes from something emotional or stressful, or maybe perhaps even spiritual, but we don't have it as a direct type of idea that this means that spiritual thing. Now, we do believe that God is always guiding us, and we do believe that our physical welfare it stems from the spiritual. So if a person has a physical issue, then not only should they go to the doctor, but they should check their mezuzahs, and in their prayer they should recognize that there's something in there, something spiritual here, but we don't know necessarily what it is, and we don't want to assume we do. So if someone, I've had situations where a person has they're doing something which Torah wouldn't want them to do, and then they have a problem physically which seems to be directly related, and they'll say, God's punishing me for that. So we don't know God's bookkeeping at this point. We can't do that. You want to be aligned with God, open to God's blessing, do the right things and don't do the wrong things. But to draw direct correlation, that's something that only a person of very deep, Kabbalistic and spiritual knowledge could know. They're not always going to be able to know it, I'm sure, but that could be done. But we have to be very, very careful with that. And as a matter of fact, it could end up almost like really justifying the pain of or the malady the person's going through. So we really don't get into that idea. If a person is suffering from something, we don't look for why? Because there was this spiritual deficiency. We try to help them feel better, and we try to help them upgrade their spiritual lives, but not because we're saying that they're somehow we know God's punishing them for something, or this is specifically the outgrowth. We're not living like that, and emotionally speaking, for our own welfare, between us and ourselves and our loved ones, we don't want to get into the business of trying to figure out, what someone did wrong spiritually and how it's related physically. It's not. It's a game we're destined to fail at, and it's not. It doesn't do much for our empathy.
So there is no feedback loop.
I can't say there is no feedback. I would say that we can't go there. Now, if someone says, and I've had this, if someone has a problem with their leg or whatever it is, and then they check the mezuzah and it says, and the word was said where you walk on the way, that was erased. They say, okay, let's fix that. And God willing, this will open up, channels for blessing, so you can be healed from that. I'm not going to say that because the mezuzah was off. That's why the person was somehow was punished for something. I wouldn't go there. But there are certain relationships where you can see, and we'll know them best within ourselves, or we can assume. But it becomes. I don't think it's a healthy, a constructive way to place to put our minds to start aligning the physical challenges with spiritual sources. Spiritual sources, problems need to be addressed, and physical challenges need to be addressed. But in my experience, it doesn't lead us to good places if you start to make drawing causality between the two. All right. There's a lot more to read here. I will let's start. We'll go through this start next week. We'll get into some of the insights of Tzaras. So wish you all a great week.
Okay,
Unless there are
thank you.
questions?
Thank you.
Okay, be well.